Hi everybody, I'm George Dahl. Welcome to Film Journal, and today I'm reviewing It with a very special guest, Robert Siegrist.
Happy to be here, George.
Rob is a really good friend of mine. He's also a tremendous actor, and we've worked together on a lot of projects. Rob, I'm glad you could come here today. You want to tell the audience something about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, so like George and George introduced me, we've been making films together for 7-8 years now, I think.
Yeah.
Our last one was last fall called Dear Mr. Clymer. People seem to have really liked it. I think it was my favorite movie I've ever worked on with you.
I had a great time doing it also.
Yeah, but we've just been making films and talking about movies for nearly a fucking decade now.
It's crazy.
Getting old.
We are getting old. Today we're going to be talking about It. Which also deals with, it's a sort of coming-of-age story. I think a lot of people can relate to that, but it's also a really interesting horror film. And I'm going to give you let you start off first. Rob, what's your familiarity with It before you saw the film, and what did you like it? What was your impression?
You know, I knew very little about it before I came into it. I knew that there was a clown, basically. I knew that it was a horror movie involving a clown and a bunch of kids. I hadn't heard any of the story before that. I didn't know about Pennywise being like an otherworldly creature. I just knew there was a clown in the sewers, and I'd seen the trailer. That was it. And I'm not a big horror guy. I get scared really easily in the theaters, or at least I used to. I haven't gone to horror movies in a long time. And so I went with a bunch of friends. I'm like, this is gonna suck. I'm gonna be a little baby in front of all my friends, but all right, let's do this. And I loved it. I thought it was a great film. It wasn't as scary as I expected, and I thought the kids did a phenomenal job, which is really risky, I think, to cast a bunch of kids today, because child actors tend to not be the greatest, and I thought these kids killed it.
Yeah, it seems like apparently child actors are getting more and more talented. I mean, the kids in this movie are incredible. We have one of the kids, Finn Wolfhard, who was made famous by Stranger Things, which everybody and their dog watched. And he plays the role of Richie, the sort of comedic sidekick. And what are some of the other kids that we have in the film?
We've got the stutterer, Billy, who's our main character.
Yeah.
His little brother gets taken by Pennywise at the beginning of the film, and that's kind of what sets everything in motion. There's a curfew enacted on the town. People are kind of scared out of their minds about this little kid going missing, and Billy's the only one who believes his brother is still alive. Everyone else has given up. But they're hunting, trying to find Billy, who is eaten by Pennywise in maybe the first...
Georgie,
yes, sorry. Georgie in maybe the first 20 minutes of the film.
And I thought that actually the scene in which Georgie, and this movie is set in the 50s, by the way, in the little town of Derry, Maine. A lot of Stephen King's books are set in Maine. And I thought that was probably the most effective scene of the film. The opening sequence in which Georgie, the little kid, is tempted by Pennywise to come into the sewer because, you know, famously we all float down here, which is the crazy, scary line. And then at first he seems like an unassuming clown, even though he's like totally horrifying. And then we only see once his mouth opens up and he becomes like a giant monster and eats this child, do we realize that there's something, you know, horribly bizarre about Pennywise.
Which is actually, I agree with you about it being one of the most effective scenes and a really good scene to go, hey, here we go. But I thought they kind of used one of their big bombs really early in revealing in the first 15 minutes that Pennywise was this otherworldly creature. I was really, when thinking about it, they could have saved that for a lot longer. We didn't need to see him eat Georgie. He could have just pulled Georgie underneath the sewer. And I, like a lot of people, but not everyone, didn't know anything about Pennywise, like I said earlier. And so getting that in the first 10 minutes, I felt like maybe they wasted a little bit.
Well, there's been sort of a change in the It story since the book was published in '86. So originally in King's story, the initial catalyst for the idea for It was that he wanted to make his sort of magnum opus horror movie. So the idea was that there was this alien that could transform himself into any sort of thing that the kids are afraid of. We see a little bit of this in the 90s TV movie, where Pennywise also turns into a werewolf. He's the Wolfman. But mostly he's a clown, and it's because the clown is really like the most effective form, and it came to be synonymous with Pennywise, with the monster, with It. So they kind of overplay this clown thing. But the initial idea was that it would turn into things that would tempt kids to come down and hang out with it. So it wouldn't be scary right away.
Yeah.
So that's why he's a clown. But then it just became, well, the clown is so iconic, we gotta just go with clown all the time, even if it doesn't totally make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. And again, that makes me feel we're all expecting this clown. Just hold off a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Was my takeaway. But that scene is great when he's talking to Georgie and just like, I've got a boat. I've got your boat.
What did you think of the performance of the actor who played Pennywise?
I thought it absolutely horrifying. I believe after I saw the movie with some friends, we all looked it up, and I believe he was a dancer before this.
Okay.
And the guy can just contort his body in some horrifying ways, which are used very effectively throughout the scenes with him. And I don't think this movie works without fantastic performances from Pennywise and from the kids.
Did it bother you then, as a fan of the performance, that sometimes the Pennywise performance was? I thought that really the best form that actor got to portray his Pennywise was in that first scene, and for the rest of the time he's kind of a CGI gimmicky effect. Did you think that some of the accoutrements to the performance that were augmented by CGI maybe took away from the raw performance of the actor?
You know, I see where you're coming from with that, and I can agree with parts of that, but I don't believe it harmed the overall effect. I think it would have been a better reel for the actor. It would have made him look better for himself, but I don't believe that it was worse for the movie to have those CGI effects. And especially because his eyes are what really captured me during all of it. And those were all him. Because I read during the audition, they asked him to do some sort of face, and he went like this. And he actually can make his eyes go straight out. So that wasn't CGI. That the guy can actually do all of those crazy things with his eyes.
Okay. Well, and also I think his smile is awesome too. I'm trying to remember the name of the actor.
It's Billy Skarsgård. I don't know.
Oh yeah. It's something Sarsgaard. And I was wondering, is he related to any of those Skarsgård family, like Bill Skarsgård, or
I have no idea.
Who's the guy in the Avengers? He was in Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Peter Skarsgård, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, is he related to them? I'm not really sure.
I have no idea.
But I saw on Twitter a photograph of him without makeup, where he was just doing that smile, and it was really impressive.
So horrifying.
And cool, very cool. Let's get back into the movie. What did you like about it the most? When you left the theater, what did you say was the biggest impression on you?
The kids. I can't talk enough about the kids. I think they had a great cast dynamic together. My favorite was Finn Wolfhard, which I went throughout the movie flip-flopping on him. All of his incessant dick jokes and awful, crude 12, 13-year-old comedy. I went back, I would flip just absolutely hating it, and then the pendulum would swing.
Okay.
And I went back and forth 3 or 4 times, but by the end, I thought him and the director nailed that character. We all grew up with one of those kids, or 13. Mm-hmm. Your little brother, Charlie, I believe, would be the perfect example.
He would be the Richie character? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're probably right about that.
Yeah, and it was fantastic. And my favorite line of the film was after they drew the sticks to see who goes into the house. He goes, "You guys are lucky that we're drawing sticks, or we weren't measuring dicks, because I wouldn't be in here." I lost it at that. I thought that was the best line in the film.
I thought it was good too that they gave him actual funny punchlines, because that is how kids that age talk. Mm-hmm. And I thought too that role, which was played by Seth Green, the robot chicken guy, Dr. Evil's son, in the original '90s movie, he was also the real show stealer in that movie as well. So that character of Richie, I think, is a really well drawn one and well played by. When I first heard that the Finn Wolfhard character was playing that role, I was like, oh, wasn't he kind of the serious straight guy on Stranger Things? But I mean, what an incredible actor for being 14 or 15, however old he is.
That was a big takeaway of mine as well. He did a nerd character in 2 of them, and he played 2 totally different characters. They were not similar at all, and I thought that was really impressive.
Really gave him a chance to shine. I thought, good casting. Mm-hmm. I expect, big things out of that kid.
Oh, yeah.
He's really good.
He's excellent.
The rest of the cast was solid. I really liked Beverly. I thought that she was well done. She seemed like, great casting for that girl that every guy in high school is after. She's got the perfect girl next door kind of quality to her.
Yeah.
I thought she was clever too. She gets to show how clever she is when she kind of plays her good looks to her advantage and gets, what does she get out of that?
All the medical supplies for. I'm gonna look up his name.
Yeah. She gets all the medical supplies out of the guy who runs the pharmacy, and you can see how she sort of has to use her charm and wit to get out of creepy situations because her home life has been so horrible and abusive.
Yeah, she knows it's messed up that she knows this, but she knows that that pharmacist guy has a huge crush on her and uses it to her advantage.
Yeah.
But his name, Ben, is the kid that they're saving who gets... Those bullies are intense in this film.
They really are, yeah. And actually, the treatment of the bullies was, I thought, effective in one way. They revealed that the police officer is the bully's father. I thought was a good one. Mm-hmm. But I was upset having seen... I've not read the original book, but I have seen the original 1990
TV movie.
Yeah, TV movie directed by Tommy Lee Wallace. And in that movie, the bully character gets thrown in jail, and he doesn't come back until they're adults, and he's in prison in a psych ward, and Pennywise tricks him into going and trying to kill the characters as adults, which I thought... And in this one, they just kind of did away with him at the end of this movie. I thought that was, kind of a missed opportunity. Mm-hmm. But what were you going to say about...
we were still talking about Bev, and so there's the scene where she becomes friends with the boys after they save Ben, which Ben is the fat kid who's getting bullied by the bullies for being fat. And that's when we get all the kids together for the first time. They save this outsider from the bullies who are carving things into his stomach, and it's really a gruesome scene.
Yeah.
And then we kind of get a fun montage for a while. The kids bonding, going swimming, going into Ben's room, and you forget about Pennywise for a little bit.
Yeah.
Until he comes back. But also, one of the best laugh out loud parts of the movie is when Ben's door swings open and we have that poster on his door.
What was his poster?
It was... it's not Cool in the Gang. He had that boy band
Boyz II Men?
Yes.
Okay.
And Bev shuts the door before any of the other kids can see it and bully him about it.
That's right, and I misspoke by saying that this film took place in the 50s. That's the original story. This one takes place in the late 80s, which I guess will work better when they go into the second one when they're all adults and it can be set in present day. Another problem I had was that with the character of Mike, we were introduced to his character first. He works on a farm, and his dad or grandfather is saying you need to take the shot and kill this sheep with the mechanism that we're all familiar with after seeing No Country for Old Men. Mm-hmm. And he can't really do it. He's having a tough time with it. And that's really the only thing we get out of Mike. Originally in the original book and movie, Ben is just kind of like the sweet, good-hearted guy, and he's like a poet and kind of a writer. Mm-hmm. And he becomes an artist later on in life. Mm-hmm. But Mike is the historian. And that was kind of his thing. And he stayed in the town and was the town librarian, and he calls them all together when they're adults. Mm. So giving that aspect of Mike's character to Ben on top of his, sort of artistic and artistic soul, I thought stripped Mike of basically anything, and all he was really was the guy who had the cow gun.
And he was also struggling with his family. They were not super wealthy, and I thought...
I suppose.
I do agree. He was kind of ousted among the bigger of the kids. Yeah, Billy, Bev, Richie.
Right.
And... but I thought his was one of the scarier forms of Pennywise, when he's trying to deliver meat to the butcher shop, and there's all these trapped slaves trying to get their arms out the door and bring him in, and that's when the bullies come riding down the alley and Pennywise disappears. But it was a horrifying scene for a while, and towards the beginning of the movie, when I saw that, I was like, okay, I was expecting to be scared for the rest of the film at that point. At that point, we'd had the... what's the kid? His little brother's
Georgie.
name?
Yeah.
We had Georgie, and then Mike's horror, and I was set up to be terrified for the rest of the film.
But what happened?
It didn't get as scary as I thought it would. It was still a horror film, but it wasn't scary. It was almost sci-fi and fantasy-like.
It became like a jump scare, spectacular.
Mm-hmm. They didn't do any absurd jump scares. They weren't trying to just scare you, which I appreciated. It was a tense thriller, more like, than an actual scary horror film.
And I thought there was a lot of really grotesque and interesting and scary and eerie imagery. Mm-hmm. So definitely that scene where Mike opens up the door to the butcher shop and Pennywise is hanging there on a chain like a slaughtered animal. Mm-hmm. I thought that was, really effective and really eerie. And I'll say that my girlfriend Taylor screamed audibly 3 times during the movie. like out loud in the theater.
Yeah.
But which is, fun. That adds to the nice atmosphere. And everyone was having a good laugh, and it was a nice atmosphere, and it wasn't like too horrifying. It wasn't like watching Saw or anything like that.
Yeah.
Now, did you find yourself enjoying the fact that it was a little more of a fantasy sci-fi movie and less of a horror, like, gore fest? Or were you let down that you weren't as scared as you thought you'd be?
I was enjoying it because even though that wasn't what I was expecting, they did that thriller aspect really, really well. And so it was a well-made movie that I thoroughly enjoyed and was hooked the whole time.
I'll tell you that my problem was... So all the kids have their separate encounters with Pennywise, and they realize that something is going on in this town, something's being covered up. They come together, they decide they're going to investigate. They go to a creepy old house where they think Pennywise is residing. Turns out he is in there. And for me, that scene was a kind of a House of Horrors roller coaster sequence that goes on for too long, and I think in part adds to the overlong runtime of the movie. And I didn't think it added a whole lot. It just seemed like a producer saying, not scary enough. We need to add in a separate sequence where they encounter Pennywise that is just, a big horror show spectacle. And I thought that was almost completely unnecessary. And while there were some effective images there, I found myself throwing up my hands and being like, what was the point of that sequence? Did you feel the same way, or am I being too picky?
I didn't, but I see where you're coming from. I think what we got out of that scene, I agree that it was probably too long.
Yeah.
What I got out of that scene was the kids learning about Pennywise. They, up until that point, didn't have the information they needed to go into that well and know that Pennywise could change forms. At that point, they just knew he was everywhere.
Yeah.
And that they'd been seeing scary things. They didn't really know until that he was changing among them and some of his powers. I thought that better prepared them and helped them solve the mystery a little bit, but it was a little long. They were in that house for quite a while, and the information could have been learned in other ways.
I really like that sequence too, when they're looking at the old slides on the projector of the town, and Pennywise keeps getting bigger and bigger until he's coming out of the projector. I thought that was really well done. A lot of really creative stuff in this movie. Let's get back to the kids and all of the actors. Now, as an actor, what did you like about the performances of all the characters? What do you think stuck out for you? Did you learn anything? Did you maybe identify any sort of techniques they were using? Or
not so much techniques they were using, because they were just playing their parts really well. I think the biggest thing about this was we have a bunch of kids, and some of them are used more than others, but none of them had the same voice. None of them, there wasn't a kid there that I could see being eliminated and adding a little bit of his character to another character. Like eliminating Mike and adding some of his stuff to one of the lesser known kids that we've yet to get to.
Like Eddie, the hypochondriac.
You couldn't take away Eddie's stuff and add it to Mike. And not lose something from the film. And so by having distinct voices and the actors all played their characters differently, which is the reason I enjoyed it the most, and I think the reason why a lot of people enjoyed it the most, is we had a bunch of kids who were different, and it was like growing up with them a little bit. I don't know about you, but it made me a little wistful for my own childhood.
Yeah, a little nostalgic. And you're right, the characters are all... I'm sorry to spit like weirdly out of my mouth. And you're absolutely right, the kids are all like very well drawn. They all have interesting backstories. Like Eddie the hypochondriac has like an overbearing mother who wears, sweatpants around and won't let him go outside, and is kind of a, not the most pleasant person to look at. And Billy has sort of the regular family, but also he's got this darkness of Georgie, and there's a sort of a weird denial that's setting in his family. And Beverly has a father who is like a janitor, a working class guy, but also a pedophile. It looks like he takes advantage of his daughter. Mike has sort of overbearing parents who run a farm, and he's a little frightened by all the blood and gore and things he has to do. He's sort of oppressed by his feeling of duty, or of having to be masculine. Who was the other? Who's some of the other?
And then we have the kid. We haven't talked about Ben. We also haven't talked about I forget his name off the top of my head. The kid who's scared of the ghost in the painting. He's
probably the most forgettable out of all of them.
He was scared of the ghost, and
sort of
now that I I'm thinking about it. I haven't seen the movie since September.
Yeah.
That's about all I remember about
His
him.
father's a rabbi, and he's not the most.
Yes, that's right.
Like,
And he doesn't really enjoy the Jewish aspect of his upbringing, and that's kind of a big fear of his as well. That's played upon.
out of all the kids, who did you like the most? Who did you identify with the most?
You know, I really liked Billy.
Yeah.
He was who I was surprised that he was the one I liked the most, because I wasn't necessarily the most wowed by his performance, but actually, or I wasn't through the beginning of the film, but by the end I took a step back and looked at it, and he was excellent. His big moment where he doesn't stutter as he yells at Pennywise at the end, while almost expected, was still really powerful for me. Otherwise, yeah, he was my favorite. And then again, like we talked with Finn's portrayal of Richie, he was excellent. We all knew that kid who swore because swearing makes you edgy and cool. And
Yeah.
I'm a badass because I can say fuck 7 different times.
Right.
And it was great. I really enjoyed those two the most.
Okay. I think too the kids are so well drawn. I think that's the most fun part. Then when we get into part 2, getting to see what they're like when they're adults is a really pleasurable thing. You know, especially in the original version.
Yeah.
Because they are such distinct personalities, and I'll be interested to see how they transition for the sequel. I'll also say this too. Unfortunately, it's fun to see initially what they look like, what they're all like as adults, but it's also the least interesting part of the story, because when you're adults, the clown is not as scary. And that element of the story, we get a lot of some of the romances come together. We get a lot of all the kids really overcoming their sort of personality defects that have plagued them in their adulthood, but it's still not as satisfying or interesting as the children taking on the clown. So that might be an issue on part 2, which is going to happen definitely, because this movie was a gigantic smash. I think you looked at the numbers earlier.
Yeah,
it was close.
668 million, biggest horror box office ever. So, as a horror aficionado, kind of the genre that really got you into film originally, correct?
Yeah, I mean, seeing American Werewolf in London was really a big jolt to me in my sensibilities. I'll talk about that in the review I did for it.
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
So, how, with all of this brand new success for horror and with the Stranger Things hype, how do you feel about? Are you excited for the genre going forward?
Yeah, I totally am, because this is the kind of horror that I really enjoy, which is eerie, creepy, classic 80s style horror. For a long time, the only horror game in town was Saw, and that's kind of something that I'm not really that interested to.
Jump scares and gore.
Yeah, so to see the more John Carpenter style, George Romero, David Cronenberg fantasy element, because I think horror really works when there's a lot of fantasy and imagination going on.
Good world building.
Exactly, yeah, and having it be really creepy. I like stuff, like this, with a lot of demons and scary monsters and atmosphere. I'm really big on atmosphere, and that's something that this movie does very well. And something like Saw or whatever is just like throw some people in a
meat grinder
Yeah,
and have blood
exactly.
spray directly on the camera.
That was or something like Hostel was never something that I was necessarily very interested in. But this kind of stuff, yeah, I'm really happy to see this sort of nostalgia for the 80s come back, and this throwback and appreciation for directors like Carpenter, who have been kind of maligned and not remembered very fondly, to see people who appreciate their work, and because it's really crowd pleasing stuff. Horror should be a crowd pleaser.
It's amazing, and every Halloween, as soon as October rolls around, it just feels like the air is a little different. There's a little bit of spark, and
100%.
It's mischief.
Yep.
That's what horror is, mischief. You always get the first act where the kids, the teens, the whatever, they're doing something they shouldn't. It's not something terribly evil, but it's like having sex with people they're not supposed to, smoking weed behind the high school. It's just like they're getting away with something little, and then they get busted big for it.
Totally.
By this monster or what have you.
Or they have to, not so much that they get busted, like, oh, well, this is your payment for smoking or whatever, but it's like, here's just regular average kids thrown into a horrible situation. And we've seen this is what they're like before. How can they adapt to be someone who survives? I think, I think that rings true a lot today. I think it's kind of nice, too, to see. I like zombies, but to see the zombie craze kind of wane, too, is nice, because I was getting a little bit tired of that. Also.
Too much. Just like the vampires were too much back in the Twilight days.
Yeah, I'm excited to see monsters make a big comeback. So that's cool.
I agree.
thanks for doing this with me today.
Absolutely.
I had a great time. I think we'd both recommend it for sure.
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorites of the year.
Oh, perfect. So I really appreciate your insight into the movie. So
Absolutely.
all right, guys. I hope you enjoyed this review of It. I have a lot more stuff you can check out on my YouTube page. It's all around here and stuff. And hope you liked it. And hopefully, Rob, you'll come back soon for another review.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. Thanks, man.
Of course.
Cool.